Fantasy Brain!
The Atlanta Falcons could be one of the most explosive offenses in the NFL. They have an all-pro running back in Bijan Robinson. They have a potential top 5 receiver in Drake London, a great secondary receiver in Darnell Mooney, a tight end in Kyle Pitts, who has really never reached that ceiling, but a lot of people are hoping that he might hit that ceiling this year. And what does this all come down to? The quarterback position. How does Michael Penix Jr. perform this season? Because in my eyes, he is going to be the detriment of this team and whether or not this team will make or break your fantasy teams. So welcome in to episode 13 of the 32 team series featuring the Atlanta Falcons. If you haven't checked out the first 12 episodes, go check them out. You can see what we're going to be doing. But to sum it all up, we're going to be covering all the aspects on this fantasy whiteboard to the right. And we're going to be starting out with some of those depth chart changes, heading over to the fantasy football forecast after, then the strength of schedule, and then finishing up with some interesting storylines that could change the course of the season. And then before we continue, make sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts. Show us some support at Leatherbrains on Instagram, X, TikTok, YouTube, and Spotify. You can find all of our episodes on both YouTube and Spotify for both visual and audio. But like I said, we're going to be doing the Atlanta Falcons today. A team that I've been looking forward to talking about for a while. If you follow us on Twitter, you would have seen a couple of the recent posts. We saw Hunter, Slapdog, and Maruso come out and say that, he doesn't think the Falcons are going to be very good this year and that Raheem Morris is going to be fired. And then, a couple of days later, I'm starting to float the idea that, could we see Michael Penix Jr. in MVP conversations this year and the Falcons winning the division? Now, of course, I wasn't saying that Penix is going to be in conversations, but could we see a possibility? And I think that we could. Michael Penix Jr., 8th overall pick last year. A lot of people did not like the pick because they signed Kirk Cousins to a massive four-year deal. And all of a sudden they draft Michael Penix. And everyone's super surprised, including Kirk Cousins himself. And Penix doesn't play much his rookie year. He only plays the last 3 games of the season. Puts together a solid couple performances, 775 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. And again, that was only a 3-game span. So we really have a very small sample size of what we've seen out of Michael Penix. But from what I've seen out of Penix and what I saw out of him at Washington and now in those couple games in the NFL, and then even more towards, the present, you have training camp as of late and how he's looked. And the reports have been off the charts. The confidence out of Atlanta, at least for the offensive side of the ball, have been great. So looking at the rest of this team, I highlighted it at the beginning, but we have Bijan Robinson, who in my opinion is going to be the best pick in fantasy football this year. He is my prediction for offensive player of the year. Last year, he had almost 2,000 total scrimmage yards, 15 touchdowns, as well as 60 catches. So you have the complete full arsenal of a skill set. The Falcons have a great O-line. It's going to be the same O-line as last year, minus their center, which is a loss. Drew Dahlman handed over to my Chicago Bears, but Falcons O-line should still be a very solid unit this year. And this team's going to be relying on Bijan Robinson. I mean, he is one of the most durable players in the NFL, and he can handle a huge workload while also producing at an elite level. So if you're talking about having a safety of a first-round pick of a guy that has been able to stay healthy both in his college and NFL career to this point, that also provides you high weekly upside and high season-long upside. Bijan Robinson, in my opinion, is going to be the best player in fantasy football this year, and you'll see that when we get to the player projections. Tyler Algier is going to be the backup running back on this team. Now, we don't have much to talk about when it comes to Algier because he really isn't relevant as long as Bijan is healthy, but if Bijan Robinson were to go down with an injury and miss a couple weeks or for some reason miss the entire season, Tyler Algier becomes one of the best running backs in fantasy football, or maybe not one of the best, but one of the best with league-winning upside because we saw what he's able to do his rookie year before Bijan came onto the Falcons, and Algier was an 1,000-yard rusher, and that was with a team that had almost no pass offense as well. So Algier has proven in the past that he can be a productive back if he is given the touches, and so Algier does have a lot of value in your redraft leagues as a handcuff. If you draft Bijan Robinson, I think getting Tyler Algier is a really good move. If you are looking for upside in best ball, I think Tyler Algier is also a really good option there. But besides that, you're never going to be starting him unless Robinson is out. Looking at this receiver room, headlined by Drake London. He's been in the league now for a couple seasons. This is his fourth year. We've seen kind of an uptick in production each season, but last year was truly his breakout year. He had 100 receptions, a little bit under 1,300 yards, and 9 touchdowns. Now, obviously, most of that was with Kirk Cousins, but we did get to see a really, small sample size with Michael Penix. And in week 18, Drake London went crazy, which doesn't count for fantasy, but he did score over 40 fantasy points if it were to count. So we know that that connection between Penix and London has been flowing, whether it was last year, whether it's this year through training camp. So Drake London, he's going to be in the top 10, top 15 receivers drafted, and he's very talented and deserves to be there. Darnell Mooney is going to be the receiver 2 on this team, coming into the second year of his 3-year deal with the Atlanta Falcons. And I think the big thing about Darnell Mooney is that I think he's one of the most underrated players in fantasy football this year. I'm coming out with a video in a couple days about Darnell Mooney and why he is currently one of the most underrated receivers in fantasy, going as the wide receiver 49 in drafts. And that is simply because he had about 950 receiving yards. I think he actually had a little bit more than that. He was just south of 1,000. And that was a year where you have Kirk Cousins, who some people would say that's an upgrade over Penix. I think that Michael Penix is a much better quarterback. And so I think that at the worst, you could get the same season that Mooney had last year, which is couple touchdowns. He could hit the 70 reception mark and around 1,000 yards. And if you're getting that in a late receiver 4, high end receiver 5, I think that's going to be money. And he's going to provide a floor where you could start him any week if you have injuries, if you have bye weeks. So I think he's going to be a really solid plug and play player for redraft and also a really solid option for best ball. Then we get into the kind of the scraps of the receiver room. We have Ray McCloud, who's going to be the primary slot receiver on this team. Now, I do think McCloud has upside in best ball formats where he could go for a long touchdown any week. And, he could have some solid random weeks, but you're never going to know when to start him. So, Ray McCloud in your regular redraft league, similar to Kaderil Hodge, who's their receiver 4, are really not going to have much value when it comes to like I said, your regular draft. And then at the tight end position, we have the one, the only Kyle Pitts. Everyone knows who Kyle Pitts is. Coming off, I'd say his second best season, where he had about 47 catches, 600 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Now, Kyle Pitts, obviously his entire career since his rookie year has been very disappointing. There's been a lot of news out of training camp about him, getting more targets this year, him developing a connection with Michael Penix Jr. And I think what I've kind of taken out all of this is that, and we'll get to this when we get to the forecast, is that Kyle Pitts, he's an okay player. If I'm being honest with you, I don't really think he's that great. When I watch him play, I don't think he's a very good route runner. I don't think his hands are anything special. I think he's very fast and he's very athletic, which allows him to get open some of the time against linebackers or safeties. And it allows him to get open on routes where he just has to outrun the defender on like a drag route or a go route for a tight end. But in terms of actual skill when it comes to the football field, I I find it hard to see, where he has it. And I think, that's from watching him for the last few years. And he's played 4 years in the NFL at this point, and we haven't really seen much since his rookie year. But what we'll kind of talk about in, about 10 minutes here is the upside that comes with him for his current price. So let's get on to the meat of this episode, the fantasy football forecast. I got the Falcons and Michael Penix Jr. passing for a little bit over 4,000 yards and 28 touchdowns and just south of 370 completions. So I think Michael Penix, I got him finishing as my quarterback 22 on the season. He's going as the quarterback 23. Now, a lot of people out there that are listening are going to say, hey, you were talking about earlier him being in MVP conversations and he's throwing for 4,000 yards. So how could that be the case? Penix has almost no rushing upside, so he's going to lose a couple points per game, such as even just the mid rushing quarterbacks, not even talking about guys like Lamar and Daniels and Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen, but just comparatively, like he's going to profile a lot similarly to a player like Jared Goff or Jordan Love, who's really not going to run much, and all their production is going to come from the passing attack, which means that Penix is going to be a very high floor player. I think we can rely on him every week to give us around 14 to 15 points. But are we going to see a ton of games where he's giving you 28 to 30 points? Probably not, which I think is kind of the tough part about having a player like him. And I think that the upside for him is going to be in super flex leagues. I think he's a great player to have in super flex leagues because I have him as quarterback 22. But if all goes right and the Falcons offense is great this year and Penix performs, he could easily finish in the quarterback 10 to 15 range. And the 10 to 15 range would be a huge upgrade over where you're drafting him, but he's not going to provide you with that top 10 upside like some of these other rushing quarterbacks. We're going to talk about the Panthers next. I don't even like Bryce Young, but Bryce Young has top 10 upside with the fact that he had 6 rushing touchdowns last year in only, 10 to 11 games. So just straight up looking at Penix and the player that he is a very high floor player. He has great weapons. And I do believe in his talent and his ability to succeed. But this is going to be a high floor, low ceiling player. Looking at some of the receivers on this team, we have Drake London. I got him going at the receiver 12. He's currently going in drafts right now as the receiver 9, so I got it pretty neck and neck. Now I have Drake London going for about 1,100 yards, 92 catches, and 8 touchdowns. So I have him having a great year. Obviously, when we make these rankings, when we project out all these teams, it's all based on statistics. So could I see him going over that yards mark? Absolutely. But he could miss 2 to 3 games in the season. He might not hit that yard mark. There's a lot of different variables that could affect it. So I think with Drake London, what you have to know is, in my eyes, he is going to be the end of kind of that elite tier of guys where you have, after the big 3, you have your Puka, Nico Collins, you have Brian Thomas Jr., you have Malik Neighbors. And then I think you can firmly put Drake London right after them in a tier right below. But I would easily rather have him than guys like A.J. Brown, Lad McConkey, T. Higgins, Rashee Rice, whatever you want to include as the next tier. So I think he's not necessarily part of that elite group, but he has elite upside. And he could easily enter the top 5 if he's able to put up what he did last year, but with more touchdowns. We saw Terry McLaurin last year when he finally got some really good quarterback play, jump from a career high 7 touchdowns to almost double that with 13. And touchdowns is going to be the real difference maker when it comes to getting inside that top 5, because all the guys in the top 10 are going to have around 100 receptions, around 1,300 yards nowadays. So touchdown is going to be your main separator for London. But he's going to have a lot of volume. He's playing with a good quarterback. It's going to be he's going to be the second option behind Bijan Robinson. So I do think that, with Penix likely to target him a ton, London's a great option. I talked about Darnell Mooney being one of my favorite players to draft. He's currently going, like I mentioned earlier, as the receiver 49. I have him as my receiver 31 on the season. So an 18 guy jump for Darnell Mooney. I have him going for about 77 catches, 890 yards, and 5.5 touchdowns. So when you really think about it, it's not that crazy. Like, are you telling me that Darnell Mooney can't go out there and have, first off, that's less yards than he had last season. That's around the same amount of catches that he had last season, and like 1 or 2 more touchdowns than he had last season. So I'm basically just predicting Darnell Mooney to have the same season as last year. And he's still 18 spots ahead of where he's currently being drafted in my rankings. And I think that the main differentiator in this is the fact that I think that he could even go higher than this, with the fact that Penix could throw for more than 4,000 yards. Even if London goes out there and has 1,400, Mooney could easily eclipse the century mark, or 1,000 yards at that point. He's not going to eclipse the century mark in receptions, but he could have 1,000 yards. He could have 80 catches, and who knows? He could still get 6 touchdowns, and that would land him comfortably inside the top 30 receivers. So I think when you're talking about talent and opportunity, I think Mooney is a great option to get. And then I got Ray McLeod, comes in. I got him going for about 40 catches, 450 yards, couple touchdowns as well. I think he'll be a solid option. I got him as my wide receiver 82. He's going as the receiver 91. Like I mentioned, I think good best ball player. He has upside if he can catch a long touchdown, but you're never going to be starting this guy in your regular redraft leagues. And I think even if there was an injury to one of these top 2 receivers, I think Kaderil Hodge would actually be the guy to step in as that receiver 2 in 2 receiver sets, just because he's a better blocker. So just something to think about with McLeod if you are drafting him, is that he doesn't have that upside even as the receiver 3 to become the 2, just because of the play style that he is. Looking at Kyle Pitts, I got him as my tight end 16. Now, like I mentioned, I don't think Kyle Pitts is a great player by any means. So I got him at my tight end 16. He's going as the tight end 19. I have Pitts going for about 62 catches, 640 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So I have him having better year than last year, getting about 10 to 15 more catches, 2 more touchdowns, a little bit more yards. So I have him improving in all aspects, but I still don't think he's that great. Now, does he have the upside to go out there and catch 8 to 9 touchdowns? Of course he does. And I think this is finally the year where it's appropriate to start drafting Kyle Pitts, even if you don't like him, especially in those best ball formats where you're looking for the highest upside possible. Because there definitely is a scenario where Kyle Pitts puts it together and he is a top 10 tight end this year. I think that he's a great player to get at his current price. Tight end 19, I mean, you're getting a player with his draft capital from a couple years ago in a really good offense that's going to be throwing the ball a lot. I think Kyle Pitts is a very good option late in drafts. And again, if you're even getting him in your regular redraft league, I still think that if you get him, let's say you take a Mark Andrews at tight end 8, or you take a Kincaid or a Ferguson or a Tyler Warren or a Loveland, somebody like that. I think Pitts is perfect to pair with them because you're not relying on Kyle Pitts to carry your team every week, not carry, but to score points every week. But week 4 comes along and he was great the first 4 weeks. Now you have another tight end that you can play. And who knows how your top guy is doing. So I think at his current price, he is absolutely a great value. And even if you don't like him, you have to recognize that value that he is and be willing to at least draft him if he is at your pick and the situation makes sense. I think that's the main thing to worry or to think about with these drafts. If you're only drafting one team, I get it. There are going to be players you don't want and players you do. But if you're in multiple leagues, you got to really be playing the board, especially if you're doing best ball. You always have to play the board and how it lies and try to get the best value for what you can do. Looking at the rushing attack, like I mentioned earlier, Bijan Robinson is my RB1. He's going as the RB2, barely behind Saquon Barkley. In best ball leagues, he is the RB1. But this guy's the top 3 running back talent in the league. I mentioned it all earlier. Great offense, great receiving upside, very durable. So I got Bijan going for, on the receiving end, about 45 catches for 500 yards. And then got him going for about another 1250 rushing and another 10 touchdowns. So I have Bijan going for 13 total touchdowns. And the thing is, comparatively to last year, these are all lower numbers. But I'm not going to go out and project him to go for 1900 yards again. Now, could I see that happening if he plays all 17 games? Absolutely. But I think just looking at the statistical model and how this team actually projects out, that's still going to be RB1 numbers. So he could easily hit more than this. And I think just his overall impact on this team and the trust that they're going to put into him. I mean, Saquon came out on the NFL Top 100 the other day and he said Bijan is going to be the next great back in the league, obviously behind himself. So I think everybody knows what Bijan can bring to the table. So, don't even think twice about it. I think if you want to go receiver, you can go Jamar Chase. If you're in a 3 receiver, start 3 and a flex. But if you're in a 2 running back, 2 receiver, and 1 flex league on ESPN, take Bijan Robinson first because running backs are going to be way more valuable and way harder to get. And like I mentioned, I think he's going to be the number 1 player in fantasy this year. But then looking at Tyler Algier, I still think Algier is going to have a solid season. I still have Algier going for 600 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns. So I think Algier is still going to have a role. I think he's still going to get some, a couple carries per game. He's going to play around a 30% snap share, maybe a 20%, because he is a good player and they want to get him involved. But like I mentioned, he is not going to have any value unless Bijan Robinson goes down. So great handcuff option, but just standalone value, Algier is going to be towards the bottom of your roster. That is going to wrap up the forecast. And, before we end off this episode, let's get into the strength schedule and kind of how these playoff games are going to line up. So they have the 5th easiest schedule for quarterbacks. So it is looking great for Michael Penix being able to sling the ball against some poor secondaries, at least based on what we saw last season. But it's weird because then you look at the receivers and they have the 10th hardest, which is also the 23rd ranked in the league. So the receivers have kind of a tough schedule, but in terms of quarterbacks from a fantasy perspective, it seems like Michael Penix can have an easier one. And that's going to pair well with a really easy running back schedule, the 5th easiest for running back. So that just adds more fuel to the fire of why Bijan Robinson is going to be great this year. They're not playing that tough of a schedule for running backs. And these rush defenses that they're playing, you have to think about it this way. They're playing the Panthers, Saints, and Bucks, who those teams are all okay when it comes to the defensive side of the ball. But when you get those teams each twice a year guaranteed, I mean, you could be going up against a lot tougher defenses than any of those teams. So when you look at that, really good schedule for quarterbacks, really good for running backs. Tight end is going to come similar to the receivers, where it's going to be the 12th hardest, coming in at 21st in the league. And I've mentioned this before, I'm not going to draft Pitts any higher or any lower based off his tight end schedule, because that, if anything, is going to change so much on a year-to-year basis. But I do think it is kind of interesting to see with the quarterback having the easy schedule and the receivers and tight ends having a tougher one. So I think this might mean, a lot more touchdowns potentially for Michael Penix, but maybe less yards and less receptions and less overall volume in the passing offense. Now, the Falcons have a terrific, absolutely terrific playoff schedule. They play Week 15 in Tampa Bay. Divisional matchup. They're going to be playing for something. It's going to be a warm weather game against a mediocre defense. Week 16, you play in Arizona, another warm weather, bad defensive team. And then Week 17 at home in the Dome against the Rams, who are another team that is going to score points, but their defense is good, but their secondary is not that great. So I think if you're looking at this playoff schedule for the likes of Michael Penix, Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Kyle Pitts, this looks beautiful. And obviously it might not look as appealing for Bijan Robinson, but he's going to be the best player in fantasy, so he's going to probably go off every single week. With some of these storylines, I don't think there's that many. We mentioned it. I mean, Michael Penix Jr. is going to be the complete deterrent. I don't know why I can't speak today. Deterrent of this team. If he's great, all these guys are probably going to outproduce their value. If he's not, then all these guys, besides maybe Bijan Robinson, are going to be bad picks in fantasy this year. So I think it's when you're drafting players on this Falcons offense, it is solely based on how do you feel about Michael Penix Jr. and how do you also feel about Raheem Morris? I'm a little iffy on Morris, but I am confident in Penix, and that's why I am high on this Falcons team. And I do think the Falcons are going to win the division. I think that they made a lot of good offseason moves. I think that they improved their defense heavily, especially on the D-line. And I'm really excited to see what Penix can do with a full offseason and now get to start from day one in the season. But I hope that everybody enjoyed this episode 13 of the 32-team series covering the Atlanta Falcons. Let us know in the comments what else you'd like to see in future episodes. And also make sure to follow us on all of our social medias at Leatherbrains on X, Instagram, TikTok. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube, and then you can find the audio version of this podcast and all the other ones on Spotify. Hopefully you all enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.
3, 2, 1.
Got a blast!
Thanks for checking out the Fantasy Brains. Don't miss next week's episode, Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. See you next week, Brainiacs.